Greg Black is a fourth grade student at Village Elementary School in Middletown, New Jersey. He is in LLD setting full day. He lives with his mother and father. His mother is a special education math teacher at Bayshore Middle School, and his father works for a technology company. Greg was born prematurely, weighing only 1 pound, 8 ounces. After he was born, there was significant bleeding in his brain, resulting him to be in the NICU for over 2 months. He was tested in March and April of 2021 to determine if he's still eligible for special education services and to determine if the LLD setting is still the least restrictive environment for him. When Greg was in 3rd grade and 9 years old, he took the Wechsler Intelligence Scale of Intelligence 5 assessment. The purpose of this assessment is to measure a child's intellectual ability and the 5 cognitive domains, including verbal comprehension, visual, spatial, fluid reasoning, working memory, and processing speed. For verbal comprehension, he was asked a series of questions that assesses his word knowledge, that assesses his ability to retrieve prior information, his ability to solve problems, and to determine how successfully he can communicate his knowledge. The visual spatial section had him looking for specific details in a picture and seeing if he can identify patterns in these pictures. For fluid reasoning, he was given 2 pictures and he needed to identify the relationship between them. For working memory, he was given a series of facts and he needed to recall those facts. For processing speed, he was given a sheet with a bunch of shapes and he was told to put a circle around a certain shape. So for example, circle all the triangles, and he only had a certain amount of time to do this. In the verbal comprehension section, he scored an 82, which is low average and falls in the 14th percentile. He scored a 72 in working memory, which is considered very low and in the 3rd percentile. He scored extremely low in visual spatial and fluid reasoning, scoring a 67 on both of those sections, which does place him in the 1st percentile for both of those sections. Lastly, he scored a 60, which is extremely low for processing speed, and puts him in the 0.04 percentile. The second assessment he took was again in March 2021, making him 9 years old and in 3rd grade. The WOLD sentence copying test is an assessment that's used to determine his ability to copy a sentence from the top of the page to the bottom of the page. This assessment was very simple. The assessor gave him a sentence, and they wanted to see how fast he can write the sentences and how accurately he can write the sentences. He scored below a 2nd grade level for sentence copying. He was low in visual motor skills, but average in visual perception and motor coordination. No scores or percentiles were given for this assessment. It was noted, however, that he did have trouble concentrating during this assessment. He was very easily distracted by things on the desk or by people walking outside the room. On the same day, he was given the Clinical Evaluation of Language Fundamentals 5th edition assessment. The purpose of this assessment is to diagnose a language disorder. It's used to determine language strengths and weaknesses. The first part of this assessment, he was shown 4 pictures and given a sentence such as, "I can eat this." He then had to look at the 4 pictures and determine which of those things he could eat. Next part of the assessment was the word structure part. So the word structure part, he was told to point to a certain picture. So they gave him a word and he had to point to the right picture that matched that word. He also, for this section, had to look at a picture and fill in a blank. So the assessor gave him a fill-in-the-blank sentence. He had to point to the correct picture that matched that fill-in-the-blank sentence. For word classes, he identifies synonyms for a given word. The next part of the section was following directions. For following directions, he was given a row of shapes, and the assessor verbally gave him a direction. For example, point to the triangle. And then he had to successfully point to the triangle. For formulated sentences, he was given a specific word, and he was asked to create a sentence from that word. The next part of the assessment was recalling sentences. He was verbally given a series of sentences, and then he needed to repeat those sentences back to the assessor. The next part of the assessment was understanding spoken paragraphs. He was verbally read a paragraph, and then he needed to answer comprehension questions based on that paragraph. For the word definition section, he was given a word and a sentence. He then had to provide a definition for that word using that sentence. Lastly, for semantic relationships, he was given a sentence such as, an hour is longer than blank, and then given 5 multiple choice options, he had to choose the correct word. There was only an overall composite score given for this assessment. Averaging all the sections together, he received a 62 and is in the first percentile. There were no strengths or weaknesses noted. I did, however, think this was a little strange that only an overall composite score was given because there were so many sections to this test. I did contact the case manager to see if maybe it just wasn't added to the file or maybe if it was placed in a different file, and she was not able to find anything. The next assessments given was when he was in 3rd grade, but he was 10 years old. This was the expressive one-word picture vocabulary test, 4th edition. The purpose of this assessment is to assess a student's knowledge of the English-speaking language. For this assessment, he was given a series of illustrations, and then he needed to either name what was on that picture or describe the action or concept that was on that picture. He scored a composite score of a 90, which is average. No percentile was given. Vocabulary was noted to be a strength for him in this area. The last assessment Greg took was the Woodcock-Johnson 4 when he was 10 years old and in 3rd grade. The purpose of this assessment is to identify strengths and weaknesses of the student in the areas of cognition, language, and academic ability, specifically in the areas of English and math. In this test, he needed to read words without defining them. So he had to just silently read the word, not define it. He needed to silently read a sentence and then fill in a blank that was below that sentence. And he had to read a simple sentence, and then there was a question at the bottom of that simple sentence that was either yes or no. So he had to answer that question correctly based on that sentence. He had to do this in 3 minutes. For math, he needed to solve as many subtraction, addition, multiplication, and division calculations as he could in 3 minutes. Greg scored an 81 in basic reading skills, which is average. He scored low in broad reading with a 73. Reading comprehension, he scored a 73. Reading fluency, he scored a 78. Written expression, he scored a 76. And oral expression, he scored a 76. He scored very low in listening comprehension with a 61. Based on these scores, it can be concluded that Greg is below grade level compared to his peers. He is low in reading skills, listening comprehension, written expression, memory, processing speed, visual motor skills, visual spatial skills, and fluid reasoning. He is strong in vocabulary. In terms of him being able to copy a sentence, he was below a 2nd grade level. Language overall is a weakness for him. His current diagnosis is ADHD and static exolepathy. So based on these, it can be determined that he has a deficit in communication, cognition, and attention. These deficits impact his ability to learn, making him eligible for special education services.